Hey, what's good, y'all? Uh, wanted to do this vlog video for you guys today, and I just want to get into it. But no worries though. I got new pieces that I'm preparing for to post up on my channel and all the various social media that I use. So no worries there. Just wanted to make sure that I got that out the way. Um, but once again, I'm just taking time to make sure that I don't burn myself out with the writing, with the posting. So just wanted to get that out the way real quick. And also, I wanted to say that for the topic of this video that I'm trying to get into, I just want to start off by saying this, that when it comes to exposure, and at the moment, right now, at this moment in this video, I'm not talking about exposure in terms of exposing secrets, exposing the truth. For someone being on the receiving end of that. No, I'm talking about exposure, like being introduced to something or someone. And we got a lot of young eyes out here, a lot of young minds out here these days, where because everything has been available, everything is being shown, or nearly everything being shown, being talked about, being read about. We got young eyes and young minds out here that are very impressionable because they are young and they don't have, well, I don't necessarily want to say they don't have a clue, because chances are they would. In some form or fashion, they would. But in terms of understanding of what's going on out here in the world, they don't have a full grasp on it yet. But being exposed to everything that's going on out here, and this is actually something that I tend to say a lot. This is something that I tend to say a lot, that the kids are exposed to everything. They are exposed to everything now, or nearly everything. And because they're young, they're very impressionable. They don't get the full grasp yet. They only understand from what they see, what they read about, what they hear, just on the surface of things. And the topic that I'm getting into for this video is that I'm only saying this right now because getting into the topics that I wanted to talk about in this, anytime there's the disclaimer, viewer discretion is advised. Anytime we hear that disclaimer, it's supposed to be a warning, a reminder that the content, the imagery, it can be disturbing. Just the idea of seeing things like that can be disturbing. Usually, when those disclaimers pop up, it's for more mature audiences, it's for more grown up audiences. So when the kids are exposed to the stuff that goes on out here these days, especially because everything is available this time around, especially now, they're gonna get exposed to a lot of stuff. And how they take on that, it's due to the nature of how much exposure they've gotten introduced to with all of this, with everything. And usually it becomes an argument of, who are you to talk about how I take care of the kids type of thing. Who are you to call yourself parenting a parent? Especially that. But in the case of me bringing this up, I'm no expert. But there are certain things in this world that the kids shouldn't even be exposed to. Because a lot is available to them now, eventually they will be. But there's a reason for viewer discretion is advised in terms of the content and imagery that can be graphic, that can be disturbing to see and hear. It's just a matter of monitoring that because a lot of these kids shouldn't be exposed to all of what's going on right away because how can they understand everything that's happening? And then comes the moment that when they are exposed to it, they have to be taught on how to navigate that as they grow up. There is the whole thing of think about the kids. What about the kids? Well, this is one of those cases where monitoring what they see, what they hear, so that they'll still have a chance to be kids before they gotta grow up and navigate the world as is, because it's a lot. It's a lot that they are exposed to now. So the moment they are exposed and introduced to this stuff, they have to be taught about these things. They have to be taught how to navigate all of this at a young age. You know, childhood is supposed to be about kids being able to be kids. But there's always going to be the talk of different generations of kids. And given the nature of where we're at now, yeah. There's always going to be a debate, a back and forth, an argument over stuff like that. But for me, like I said, I ain't no expert. But it's best to monitor what they see and hear because they don't have the full grasp of it yet. They don't understand all of it yet. Because when they get older, that's when they really have to navigate it. And with that being said, I wanted to get into the stuff that I actually wanted to talk about today. I am not a person that's big on politics, but it's inescapable because even when it comes down to the entertainment factor of it all, politics do play a part in that. Politics play a part in everything, not just the politics itself. Everything. It plays into everything. It's gonna get talked about, it's gonna be read about, it's gonna be heard. It's inescapable. For someone like myself who's not really big on politics like that, there's no escaping that. I'm gonna stumble across this stuff somehow, some way, and there's gonna be a conversation surrounding that somehow, some way. And if I just so happen to have a conversation about it in some form of fashion, then yes, it's gonna be brought up. It's gonna be brought up. And yeah, there have been times when I wrote it down in my poetry pieces because given my takes on the state of the world, my point of views on how I look at things in the world, I'm still an optimistic person. I still look for the positive things in life to look forward to. I don't like focusing on the negative too much, even though the negative stuff tend to be the thing to talk about. the type of thing that could get clicks, that could get views, that could get shares, that could get likes. It's always the negative stuff that tend to have a hold on the conversations we talk about today. In some cases, it's warranted. Other times, it's exhausting. And speaking of exhausting, like I just said, getting into the politics stuff of it all, I'm not trying to get too deep into all of that because, like I said, I'm not that big on politics in the first place. I'm not that big on politics like that. I never really was. I was only ever taught to vote for the lesser of two evils. And I cringe every time I hear that now. Every time I hear that phrase, lesser of two evils. Applying that to politics, I cringe at that phrase because everything about politics, here's an understatement here, everything about politics has been screwed from the jump. It's just gotten even worse now. It's been screwed from the jump. That's a no brainer. It's been screwed from the jump. That's an understatement. And in terms of my stance on how I feel when it comes to politics, more specifically the political parties, an understatement to the understatement that I just made, right? To follow up on that. Of course, I'm going to disagree with everything on the right. But as much as I tend to do that, I tend to question things on the left as well. Now, given the circumstances of who ended up getting the White House, again in this case, you got people who supports that man just want to be able to have the bragging right to say, look at the liberals coping now. Look at the liberals coping right now. Look at the Democrats coping right now. And getting into the whole thing that coping became such a negative term to use now, weaponized for taking a loss. That is ridiculous to me. I feel like when it comes to voting, as of late, or maybe just in general, sure, I may have voted for the left. But now, especially now, I mean, it's been like this with me for quite some time, but especially now, this is how much I don't really care for politics like that because I can't trust anybody. Because you can have one candidate who can say the right things, but how can you trust that? This is just me and how I think about this, right? This is just me speaking for me individually, right here. I could vote for the left, right? This time it was just reluctant for me because I feel like it didn't matter how much, for those of us who vote for the left, like, who's to say that we can trust what goes on over there? How can we trust everybody going on over there? How? How? Especially now, I tend to question everything that goes on there. And of course, I don't trust the right. That's obvious. That's painfully obvious at this point. But speaking on this in general, anytime when it comes to politics, to me is nothing but bickering matches waiting to happen. Bound to happen. It's just bickering matches. To me, it boils down to weaponizing sympathy versus weaponizing hate. Take the policies out of it. Just for a moment. Take the policies out of it for a moment. It's nothing but voting out of spite. Again, I'm no expert. I'm just looking at it for how I see it. A lot of what goes on in politics, and I'm not just talking about the fight for the White House. I'm not just saying that. I'm talking besides that as well. Any person that we put in a position of power in any office whatsoever, how can we trust them? How? How can we trust them? How can we trust anybody? That's how I feel at this point in time now, especially now. How can we trust anybody? And speaking for me, I don't trust no one. I just don't. I don't trust nobody. I don't trust nobody. Because it's easy to think that just because you're voting, you're supposed to be doing a civic duty for the country. But the ways that this country has been going, that's the reason why I don't trust nobody. You could either say the right things or blatantly put yourself out there in a way, in a manner where hate is the driving force. I don't trust either party or any politician whatsoever. I just don't. I just feel like now, where we at now, yeah, it's just voting out of spite. It's just voting out of spite. I might as well say that between both parties. It's just voting out of spite, and the fight for the White House is just out of spite. Weaponizing sympathy versus weaponizing hate. But I will say this, for all the people who voted on the right, you could say that for those of us who voted for the left are coping right now. But is it worth it having that man back in office again? Just for him to get the win. Is it worth it? I don't have room in my heart for hate. But I definitely wanted to point that out. Is it worth it? Just because y'all able to say you got a win off of this. You got the win off of this. Is it worth it? Is it worth it to say that? Because if not all, the majority of y'all tend to look to that man to be able to say that you can get away with saying what you want and doing what you want, and on top of that, get money in the midst of all that. Because the only thing that he knows when it comes to politics is just running this country like a business, as he always does. He just runs anything and everything like a business. That's all he knows. Does he really know anything about policies and living up to that? I don't know. Who's to say that he's not being puppeteered this time around? But then again, I could say the same for the left. Who's to say nobody's being puppeteered? But I'm going to just leave it at that. Because at the end of the day, for me to talk about this right now may sound like I'm quote unquote coping in that light, but I'm just addressing this as a way of saying it like this, putting it like this. I'm going to stay prayed up because at the end of the day, that's all I can do. I'm going to stay prayed up and just go about my life, go about my days the way I should, the way I would continue to do. Just live my life and worry about the things that actually matter to me. Worry about the things that matter to me the most. That's all I can do. That's all I can do. Just gotta stay prayed up. Because I'm not putting my faith in a politician. He's the only one that I'm putting my faith in to guide me through this. So, yeah, I'm gonna say that, yeah, we gotta survive these next 4 years. Who knows what's gonna happen? We're only gonna see it as everything unfolds in real time. We're only gonna know about it as everything unfolds in real time. We don't know the exact outcome that's gonna take place. What happens, happens. But at the end of the day, for me, my faith is in him. That's it. That's all I'm focused on. That's all I care about. But moving on from that, I also want to take it back to the music side of things because speaking of the word coping being used in such a negative light, weaponized in such a negative light for taking a loss, or somebody trying to call another person out for taking a loss, really? We gotta go back to the whole Kendrick and Drake battle. And with Cole in the midst of that as well, and his part in it and out of it. Here's my take on that. Now, granted, this was going to be a longer video anyway, because I needed to get this off my chest. I needed to get all of this off my chest. It was going to be a longer video anyway. So, getting back to that battle. Now, yeah, that time has passed, but recently we had the third party, one of the quote unquote big three that we keep talking about. Now it's a never ending debate on whether or not Cole, in this case, could still have that position, even after he did what he did and said what he said, let alone putting that on wax. First off, when the battle initially happened, I can't lie. In terms of where hip hop is right now, it needed that spark again. So Kendrick simply said, I'ma light the fire. And so he did. Now, even though it has been said and evidence has been shown that between him and Drake, this whole thing has been a thing for a bit before it even happened this year. Way before it happened this year. And I get that because I did look into that And I noticed that. Actually, I even took notice of that when I was following both of their careers from their come up to where they at now. I took notice of that. I did. So when it happened, when it initially happened, Kendrick simply said, I'ma light the fire, dropping a surprise verse, bringing that control energy back, right? Now, at this point, we already know that if anybody was gonna have smoke for Drake, Drake wants to respond real quick. We all know that's what he does. But the crazy thing about it is, he wasn't the first to respond back. And I think that was the main thing. I could say that little bit of information right there as to why we was getting on cold the way that we did, being overlooked, I may be wrong on that. Maybe a lot of us did notice that. But I just wanted to point that out to emphasize the fact that Drake wasn't even the first to respond on Wax. Cole was. And the fact that he did that, it was like, damn, Cole, we didn't think you was gonna be the one to do that. We expected you to respond, but we didn't think you was gonna be the first to do it. Only for him to take that back, do the Dreamville Fest, and then he had the whole apology that he said towards Kendrick, right? He did the whole apology thing. And it was still the heat of the moment as it was happening, right? That was the thing for us that we got on cold with. The fact that you even responded at all. And that track wasn't even meant to be a full-on diss track. It was a warning shot. He literally said it on that track anyway, right? He said it. It was a warning shot. But the fact that he even dropped a response track to Kendrick at all, took it back, and apologized for it, initially when that happened, at least for me, I'm just speaking for me, because everybody had their takes on that. As a fan of hip hop, I'm not always big on the competitive stuff because there have been times when it could go further than just laying it out on Wax. It could get worse from there. There have been times that's happened. Let's not sit here and act like it didn't. It doesn't. Let's not sit here and act like it doesn't. Like, that's the main thing about the competitive aspect of things that I'm not a fan of, when it can lead to stuff like that. But that is a huge factor. I'm just making this point right here because I haven't forgotten about this. This is a huge factor of what makes hip hop what it is, the competitive aspect of it. I only like the competition of it all when it brings out the best in everybody. I don't like it when it brings out the worst in everybody. That's the thing about the competitive stuff that I don't like. When it could bring out the worst or potentially bring out the worst in people. I don't like when it gets to that point. I don't like when that happens. But a huge thing that what hip hop became, what made it what it is the competitive aspect of things, which I get. But I like it best when it brings out the best in everybody. So that there's no real animosity between the two. It's just a matter of, a spar with bars. With no bloodshed, no physical altercation whatsoever. It's just people bringing out the best of their pen. Hell, even a freestyle for that matter. Just bringing out the best in each other through rap. I do enjoy that aspect of it. I can't knock that. I can't lie about that. I do enjoy that. I do enjoy that aspect of it. But getting back to the battle though, with Cole's end of it, the fact that he was the first to respond to Kendrick, take that back, literally doing the title of the project that he dropped before the fall off. We're still waiting on that. Might delete later. And it just so happens to be that track that he deletes. It just so happened to be that. But I think Cole was also playing into the whole thing that whenever somebody posts something on social media and they put it in the caption, might delete later, I think he was also playing off of that as well. But the post is still up, even though it says that in the caption. The only joint that Cole deleted off of that project, might delete later, just so happens to be the diss track or warning shot track that he did towards Kendrick. That was the only time he even deleted something off of there, right? And then he did the apology. And this was still in the heat of all the things that was happening with the back and forth that was going on, right? And we was getting on Cole for the fact that he even did that because he responded. He initiated that. He initiated and responded to Kendrick, only to take it back and apologize for it. As a hip hop fan, I would think that between Cole and Kendrick, it was going to be a spar for bars. That's all it was going to be. That's what I initially thought. And then for Cole to do that, it was like, yo, bro, do you realize how people are going to be looking at you now just because you did that? People expected you to respond. We expected you to respond, but we didn't think you was going to be the first to do it. Number one. Number two, the fact that you took it back. Number three, you apologized for it. It's like, what? Did you really just do that? As a hip hop fan, I felt like it was a missed opportunity for Cole to really get into a spar with somebody. That's it, just a spar. Just a spar. Just a spar for bars, and that's it. Because it would have been interesting to see that. And initially, when that happened, we felt cheated at that. So we was getting on Cole with the whole thing. But then as time went on, after that happened, you got people that's still gonna give Cole heat for that. You got people who's flat out forgiving of the fact that he did what he did. And then there's people like myself who is a bit more understanding as to why he did what he did, why he said what he said. But at the same time, and that's just for me in this case, um, speaking as a Cole fan, because at the end of the day, I'm still gonna listen to his music. I'm not gonna take away what he has done for hip hop, what he has done for music in general. I'm not gonna take away that. I still appreciate him as a rapper. I still respect him as a rapper. I appreciate Cole for what he has been doing. I'm not gonna take that away from him. I'm still gonna listen to his music. I'm not just gonna write him off just because he did what he did. As a Cole fan, I ain't taking that away from him. I still respect him as a rapper. I still appreciate him as a rapper. Right? But as a hip hop fan, I'm still disappointed in that. Because Cole, if you wasn't in the right state of mind to do this, if your heart wasn't in it, then why did you do it? Why did you even drop a track in the first place? You could have saved yourself the trouble from all of this had you not done it. You shouldn't have done that in the first place. Otherwise, you wouldn't be getting this amount of heat. But what happened happened. Because usually it's expected that if someone takes their shots at you on a track, on wax, you respond back. That's usually the thing in hip hop, especially when talking about the competitive aspect of it all. That's usually supposed to be the thing in hip hop. If somebody takes their shots at you, you respond back. Otherwise, don't say anything at all. Because the moment you do, people are going to have something to say about it. And then he drops his track, Point Antonio, right? Second verse going into that song, right? The majority of that verse talks about his point of view, his perspective on why he did what he did when the battle happened, and his part in it and out of it. He was just trying to give his perspective on things. And still, it became a mixed bag of reactions. For me, again, I was more understanding as to why Cole did what he did. And again, I'm not going to take away what he has done for music, for hip hop. I'm not going to take anything away from him in terms of him as a rapper. I'm not just going to discredit the man just because he did what he did, just because he said what he said, right? I'm not going to discredit that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be one of those to do such a thing like that, to say such a thing like that. I'm still going to listen to Cole. I still appreciate Cole. I still respect Cole as a rapper, as an artist, right? I do. I do. I'm going to still listen to him. I'm a bit more forgiving, but I ain't going to forget. That's the important thing for me to take away this when it comes to Cole. I'm more forgiving, but I ain't going to forget. Because as a hip hop fan, I'm still disappointed that he did what he did and said what he said. But as a Cole fan, I get it. I get why he did what he did and said what he said. I get it. But as a hip hop fan, I'm still disappointed that he did that. But I'm not going to discredit him, though. I'm not going to take away his contributions for what he has done for hip hop and for music in general. I'm not going to take that away from him. I'm still going to listen to him. But I'm not going to forget that. That was an unforgettable thing to think about. So going back to Drake and Kendrick, while they was going at it, bruh, I would definitely say that this was one for the books. And I'll do give Drake credit for the fact that he came through swinging. He stayed in the fight, just on wax, but he stayed in the fight. I'll give him credit to that. He didn't back out because knowing Drake, if he's gonna have a back and forth with somebody, he ain't backing out. That's always been the thing with him. He ain't gonna back out, right? Credit where credit is due, right? But in terms of what he was dissing Kendrick with and how he was moving in the midst of that I didn't really mess with. I gave him credit for sticking to his guns, right? He stayed in the fight, right? I gave him credit for that. But in terms of what he was trying to diss Kendrick with and how he was moving in the midst of that wasn't it for me. That wasn't it. It wasn't it. Yes, the overall consensus is that Kendrick won. And for me, yes, I I was in the same lane. I felt that Kendrick won that. Because the way Kendrick went about it, people have been saying this entire year. Diabolical. That became the word this year. Diabolical. Because of how Kendrick was moving with the battle, within the battle, the way he was moving, There's a reason why the overall consensus for Kendrick being the one to win is there. There's a reason why. But that's the reason that I just said. It's because of how he was moving. Because he knew that if he was going to spark this thing, drop in a verse like that, and taking his shots at Drake the way that he did, Drake was going to respond with something. That's the funny thing about it, because Drake tried to do what he did with Meek, and it didn't work. Drake tried to do what he did to Meek, and it didn't work. Kendrick just let Drake have his moment when he responded with two tracks. Two tracks. He tried to back him, only for Kendrick to finally drop his response to those two tracks. Euphoria. Everybody, including myself, was anticipating what he was going to drop after Drake dropped his first two tracks. Only for Kendrick to drop Euphoria and respond to both those tracks. Then he posts a back-to-back on him with 616 in LA doing the timestamp. Because that's usually Drake's thing. Only for Drake to want to come back with Family Matters, right? He comes back with Family Matters, right? And the main thing people was talking about when it came to that is the allegation of Kendrick beating on his girl, or his fiance rather, beating on her, right? Being a domestic abuser, right? Right? And then he brought up the whole thing about his fiance, his girl, so to speak, being mixed and rapping like he's trying to free the slaves and talking about how his closest friend is the father to a child. That's not Kendrick's. All of that. Only for the wind out of that song to be taken away immediately when Kendrick drops Meet the Grams. And people was more focused on that than Family Matters. Because of the simple fact that Kendrick dropped that track immediately after Family Matters dropped. Took the wind out of that song. Out of that track. Only for Meet the Grams to get more attention off of that. Like, I didn't expect for him to do that. I didn't even expect for him to do that. As soon as I saw that he dropped another track already, I was like, what? Really? Wow. I didn't think he was going to respond that quick. I thought it was going to be a bit of a longer waiting period for him to drop something else. He just did it like that. Only for him to do a back-to-back again and dropping the biggest hit of the summer. Not Like Us. His biggest hit this past summer. Not Like Us. He did exactly what Drake did. He did a diss track that turned into a hit song. That was hilarious to me. The fact that he did a reverse Uno card on Drake. He made a hit song out of a diss track. The same way Drake did Meek, Kendrick did it on him. And even though Drake responded with his last track by doing a version of The Heart, because that's what Kendrick was doing, dropping the Heart singles before releasing an album or in between albums, regardless, dropping The Heart, right? And still, Not Like Us took the wind out of that track. And people was dissecting and analyzing the Heart Part 6 as Drake decided to go about with that one. And it was more side eyes on him than ever. Because what he responded with on that track, it did not work. It did not work. It didn't. It didn't. It did not work. It did not work. It tended to do more damage to him than it was meant to do for Kendrick. Take all the accusations and allegations out of it. Kendrick was moving different from what Drake was doing. Because at the end of the day, the man's was dissecting Drake as a man, right? Dissecting the man. Because that was really the MO when we really pay attention to the tracks that he dropped. Kendrick, I mean, he was dissecting him. That's really what he was doing the entire time. He was dissecting him. Now, of course, fans of Drake are still going to feel like he's the one that had the win. I get it. I get it. I get it. Again, no hate in my heart. But the way Drake was moving, it wasn't it. It was a reason that the overall consensus was that Kendrick won. And even through the aftermath of it all, the whole thing of dropping releases on Instagram, Drake dropping 3 packs and more singles that he was trying to drop, features that he was trying to drop, they wasn't really hitting the way that Drake usually tend to hit with his music, with the singles, with the features. They wasn't really hitting like that. Even the songs that got on the charts, they wasn't really hitting like that. And then, of course, there's the memes of it all, because he has a thing of doing that too. But even Kendrick addressed that in the midst of the battle. And then he drops his track later on Instagram, which essentially is the Heart Part 6. It's just that it wasn't titled that. um, but given the nature of what he was talking about in that song, I do appreciate what he was saying there, because he was talking about everything overall. It was bigger than the battle. And that's also after the pop out concert that he did as well. It was bigger than the battle. It was bigger than that for him. So he made sure to address that at the concert and on Wax. He made sure to do that on both fronts. This is bigger than the battle. Even though this is the thing that people are going to be talking about a lot. Even though we somewhat moved on from that, it's still going to be brought up regardless. But it was bigger than the battle for him. And he made sure to address that on both fronts. Um, and then we had two Christian rappers. Shout out to D1 and Lecrae. And the fact that they dropped tracks after he gave them shoutouts addressing this situation, addressing Kendrick in terms of what he was talking about on that track and the overall state of things as is. They made sure to acknowledge the fact that they got shouted out by him and that they're not trying to use it for clout chasing. Nah, they're not doing that. They made sure to address that. They wasn't doing it for clout chasing. They wasn't doing it for the sake of getting attention off the fact that Kendrick was the one that shouted them out, right? They made sure to talk about that, but also address the topics at hand, the issues at hand. Just talking about the overall things that they were discussing on both their tracks. And I do appreciate the fact that they even did that. Because they didn't have to, but they did. They felt like they had something to say. They made sure to say it. They got it out their system. They let people know that the fact that they got shouted out is much appreciated. And then talking about everything else amongst that, just to let y'all know, God is always with them. So I actually do appreciate their takes on the whole thing, how they feel about being shouted out, amongst other things, with their tracks that they dropped. I do appreciate that. Because they didn't have to do that. They didn't have to drop tracks, but they did it anyway. They felt like they had something to say, put it on wax, by all means. Understandable. But this one was definitely for the books. It was definitely for the books. But I said my piece on Cole. I said my piece with Kendrick and Drake. But now I also want to get into the whole Super Bowl thing. It seemed like the halftime is getting more attention than the actual game itself, the full time game. The halftime is getting more attention than the full time. The only thing I would have to say with this is I didn't think it was going to be a huge thing in terms of who was going to be performing in the Super Bowl, given the location that it's in. It was never really the case as far as I knew. Nobody was really thinking anything of that. But given the location of where the Super Bowl is supposed to be taking place now, and the fact that Kendrick was the one spotted to be the one to perform there, solo this time, because it wasn't his first go around performing at a Super Bowl. It's just it just so happened that when he did it the first time, it was in his hometown. It just so happened to be that. It was in his hometown. But now he's getting a chance to do it again, solo, but in a different city. And it's Wayne's hometown. Now, it was an ongoing debate about the whole Super Bowl performance thing. Why did Kendrick get this? Why didn't Wayne get this? I really didn't think it was going to be that big of a deal in terms of that, because I'm like, really? Why all of a sudden we're making this a huge thing? And people who, not everybody, but certain people who was given that so much heat when the announcement happened. And I'm like, what? Where is this coming from? I didn't think it was gonna be like that. I didn't think it was gonna be all of this. Like, Really? I mean, Kendrick has momentum going for him right now. As many times as people tend to talk about how he drops music and disappear for a couple years, well, this time he's actually building on that momentum that he's gotten this time around. So, yeah, he's following up with the Super Bowl. I didn't think it was going to be this serious, but turns out it ended up being that. But at the end of the day, only thing I would say about that is that whether you like it or not, Kendrick is going to do it. He made the announcement. He ain't backing out of it now. He's the one that got spotted to do the Super Bowl. He's the one that got chosen. He's the one that got picked out to do the Super Bowl, the halftime performance. So I just feel like for how Wayne was handling this, it wasn't it. And he just did a concert. He just did a concert. Louisiana. Actually, that is clever that he used his actual name. Louisiana. Louisiana. I get that. I get that. And we know how Lil Wayne tend to be when it comes to the bars. We know how he is with that. So that was clever in terms of naming the event. And he had his reunion with his old crew. But the fact that he took a moment to talk about the Super Bowl in the manner that he did, to me, it was uncalled for. Because he already said his piece beforehand, but then he doubled down on it, and it's like, oh, nah, this wasn't it. This wasn't it, man. This wasn't it. That's the only thing I could say to that. It wasn't it. It really wasn't. But like I said, whether you like it or not, whether we like it or not, Kendrick is gonna do the performance. He's gonna do the Super Bowl halftime. He's gonna he's gonna do it. He ain't backing out of this now. He's the one that got spotted. He's the one that got picked out for it. He chose to do it. He decided to do it. Made the announcement for it and everything. It's done. But everybody's gonna have different opinions, different takes on things. That's how it is, right? But in terms of having a more civilized conversation about it, sometimes it doesn't end up being that because everybody want to prove themselves to be right. A lot of times that had to be the case, right? A lot of times that tend to be the case. Everybody want to prove themselves to be right. And then the last thing that I want to get into with this video is when it comes to talking about the street life and the music. Given the recent circumstances of what's going on right now, y'all know what it is. Y'all know what I'm talking about. I don't have to say it. Y'all know what I'm talking about with this. The recent events that's taken place when it comes to the street life and music, always questioning whether or not it's real. And when it comes to the court cases, how that tend to be used against the very rappers that talk about it in their music. All I have to say to that is simply this: anytime when it leads to an altercation that's outside of the music, that tend to get more attention than the music itself. And in general, in terms of the image being bigger than the music, the moment the image becomes bigger than the music doesn't matter anymore. It's about you, your music, and your image, right? That tend to be the focus. That tend to be the focus, especially when it comes to the court cases that comes with it, right? But the music doesn't matter anymore for people who are just listening in, right? The music doesn't matter anymore once the image becomes bigger than that. And when it comes to the street stuff being talked about, it can get dangerous. Because chances are you could get killed or get locked up for it. It's one thing to talk about it on a song just because it sounds cool, just because it sells, and how those who are signed to labels, the labels profit off of that. It's one thing for it to sound cool, but when you actually have people who was about that life, that'll catch up to you. Especially if you're trying to turn your life around for the better. In this day and age, it's faster to say too little too late. Because the stuff that you was doing before, the stuff that you was talking about before, it's gonna catch up to you. And how you go about your life after that, it depends. You never know. You never know what the outcome is gonna be. It depends. That's all I wanted to say in terms of that. Um, but like I said before, with everything that goes on in the world, with everything that goes on out here, viewer discretion is advised. There's a reason for a disclaimer like that to even exist in the first place. Even though we have so much available to us, so much information out here that's available to us, and even misinformation, everything is available to us, including the young ones. When speaking for the young ones, speaking on the young ones, I should say, they need to be monitored on what they see, what they hear, what they read about. Because they don't have a grasp on it yet. They don't have a full understanding of it yet. Because at some point, when they get exposed to stuff like this and then some, they got to be taught that. They have to have a conversation about it. But they are young. Let them be young and actually have a good thing going for them as far as that goes. Not that I'm calling myself an expert in how to parent a parent, especially that. I'm not saying that at all. But young ones tend to get exposed to a lot these days. It's a lot for them to understand. It's a lot for them to grasp. They don't got they don't have the full picture of it yet. They don't get the full picture of it yet. It's only when they get older that's when they start to recognize it. I mean, that was the case for me. I was young. I didn't know everything about what's going on like that. I only know what I knew on the surface of things, not that deep. It wasn't until I got older that I started to pick up on all of it as I went along. Up to this point now. And that goes for the rest of us who's been through that. who's gone through that. It's a process to understand what's going on out here, how to navigate this world. And it's difficult to do. It ain't easy. Some of us might pick up on it, excuse me, faster than others. But at the end of the day, I know I keep saying that, but to sum it up, we're all going through that process. We were all going through that process. And even for the young ones of this generation, especially, it's the same thing. But because everything is available now, everything is out there, or nearly everything is out there, they are exposed to a lot. Viewer discretion is advised. The reason why I keep repeating that disclaimer is to acknowledge that very thing. We are all exposed to a lot of things. It's how we handle ourselves once we know what we know. How do we handle the information given to us? How do we handle ourselves in the midst of all that? How do we navigate it? How are we taught to teach others that? It's always a matter of how, why, when, who, what. Take it back to the teachers of old with the W's. And sometimes how. Had to take it back. Had to take it back to the days of old, learning the W's. So, yeah, this is the longest vlog video that I've done. It's over an hour long. But it was a lot to talk about, and it was a lot of detail for me to get into. I may not have said all the details, but you pretty much got the gist of what I'm talking about. You got the gist of what I'm saying. I don't necessarily have to go into all the details like that, the minutia of it all, but the details that I gave, just know that I'm speaking from the heart here and how the circumstances of what we're dealing with as of late in recent times, in these trying times, it's a lot and it's exhausting. It can be frustrating as well. But for someone like me who still tries to hold on to hope, still an optimist, and always praying for better things to come, regardless of all the negative that we deal with out here, keep that in mind. Not sure how many people are gonna watch this video just because it's the longest one I've ever done. But mind you, it was important for me to address this in the manner that I did. Take it or leave it. With that being said, this is BlueFlamez Da Poet, and I'm out.